a great one. Jeremiah lived through a tumultuous time in the history of Israel, and he literally saw his whole society fall apart around him. But he never loses hope. In our passage today, he indeed sees this new covenant that God is going to form with his people. Not like the old covenant, the Mosaic covenant that's based on external laws that they couldn't follow. No, this covenant will be written in their hearts. It will be a time when people won't have to tell other people about God. Everybody will know about God automatically. A wonderful time. As I was thinking about that passage, I began to realize that that's not just Jeremiah's time. That's our time. Even though we've already been associated with the new covenant, it's hard to hold on to that new covenant. We keep to want to go back to the laws and have those laws give us worth and prestige. That's what I grew up in. Perhaps you did too. That whole society of the 50s is actually falling apart in front of us. If you're old enough, you know that's what's happening. And what's happening is exactly what Isaiah is saying. We're moving away from a time when we put our trust in those external laws. And we're beginning to see that love of God is already in our hearts. We're moving away from the time of learning about God, which is what we were doing, to learning and experiencing God ourselves. And it's changing us, and it's changing society as we do this. Now, some of you are not old enough to remember how things were, so let me tell you. I grew up in the Baptist church, and my friend Snuffy grew up in the Methodist church. Well, let me rephrase that. The Baptist church is the church I went to 3 times a week. And the Methodist church was the church that Snuffy didn't go to 3 times a week. Snuffy didn't go to church, which was very unusual in those days. This is post-World War II, and everybody went to church, but Snuffy didn't. Attendance was extremely important in our church. Today, if we don't have a big crowd, we blame it on the Cubs, or we blame it on the soccer, or we blame it on a long weekend. You know how we did. Back in those days, it was serious. If you started having a low crowd, you did something about it, and what you did was have a revival. Now, it reminds me a whole lot of that scene in Animal House, where, Delta House is put on probation, and they're all just kind of, depressed around like that. And what are we going to do? And somebody says, toga, toga, toga. We're having a toga party, That's what a revival was like back in those days. You'd call in this evangelist, this hellfire and brimstone preacher, because you wanted to shape everybody up, get everybody coming to church again, you see. And you put the fear of God in them, and that's what they do. And believe me, it would start on Sunday night, and you would go to church every night, and it would culminate on Friday night. Now, can you think of anything that a teenager would love more than that? I sure could. But if by Friday you didn't know you were going to hell, you hadn't been listening. Everybody knew. I mean, the liars, the cheaters, the stealers, those who drank, those who smoked, those who thought about it, those who caroused around, those who went to church or didn't go to church, and those who didn't go to our church. Those who weren't baptized, and those who weren't baptized by immersion. I mean, we had so many rules, it was unbelievable. And you couldn't possibly not go to hell. Everybody was afraid. Now, after one of these events on a Saturday, which was our day off, my friend Snuffy had 2 people over to play with him. One was Jim, a Methodist, who I like, and one was Ronnie, a Baptist, whom, I didn't go over there because I didn't like Ronnie too much. And so I just watched from afar. They played for a while, and then they went home early, like early in the afternoon, which was unusual. And so I went over to see Snuffy, to see what he was doing. We'd go do something. He was up in his room, And his face was red, and his eyes were red. He'd been crying. And I said, what in the matter is wrong? What's wrong? It took a while, but he finally told me. He said, Ronnie told me I was going to hell because I didn't go to church. Now, I knew where he got that from because I was in the church when they said it too. But Snuffy was my friend. I was in good relationship with him, and so what I said was, what in the heck does Ronnie know? He's just a brat. Forget it. And we went out to play. But that's how it was. Not with just the kids. That's the way it was with the adults back in those days. Very much focused on whether or not we were following the law, being moral or not. And let me tell you, we weren't in relationship with one another. We were out of relationship. We were so focused on ourselves and what we were doing or not doing, we didn't even see the 80% of the population in our area that were suffering because of racism. We didn't even see it because we were focused on ourselves and achieving salvation ourselves. We were trapped, as Paul would put it, in a meritocracy system. Paul says very clearly in Romans and Galatians, morality doesn't bring us closer to God. Now, you think that's crazy, but it is the truth. Because you get trapped in this system of earning and achieving your worth. And when you do, you've got to put others down. You've got to see yourself down and up and around. You're either depressed or elated all the time. It's a mess. What saves us is the opposite of that. You see it in Jesus. Jesus didn't care about the law. Oh, he cared about it. I don't mean to say that. But he broke it all the time because he was focused on other people. He had compassion for others. It was a different world, you see, for him. He saw things differently. In this parable, we begin to see something of what happens and what happened. Because you see, the widow in this passage is actually a Christ figure. In this gospel story, this unjust judge won't hear this widow's complaint where she has something messed up with her opponent and needs to get a judge to decide or to justify them, which really means to make things right, bring them back into right relationship. That's what justice does, you see. And widows had no voice in that society. In fact, the word that is translated widow means the voiceless one. They were in a meritocracy system called patriarchy. And women had no voice at all. And if you were a woman whose husband had died, you had no voice. Because the man is the only one who could speak in that society. You had no voice. But what does she do? She speaks up. She does have a voice. And what she does is in public places, she tells this judge or proclaims to this judge that you need to hear my case. Now, if you read Deuteronomy and the laws, you know that the number one person that the judge is supposed to give justice to or to allow a trial is a widow, you know. And so what she's doing is shaming him in public. That's what the word wear it out means, where he says, you're going to wear me down or wear me out. The words that are translated there is give me a black eye, which is what we mean by losing face. You know, he's a judge that's supposed to bring justice to the people, and he's not doing it. And she's showing him that he's not, so she's shaming him in him to doing it. And so he does it. And then Jesus says, how much more will God justify you? And he will do it quickly. He's referring to the cross where we're all justified, you see. We're all made right with God and right with each other. That's what the cross is about. Jesus is this powerless one. He chooses to be that way because to be in relationship with God means to be open to God, vulnerable to each other. And once you're open and vulnerable to each other, you can enter into relationship with God and each other. But when you do that, you suffer the consequences of those who are living in a meritocracy. The leaders of religious life in those days, they were all trapped in the law in trying to earn their own righteousness, and Jesus was threatening them by not following the law. And so they kill him. And then Jesus is raised by God, which shames the leaders. It exposes them for what they are. They've killed God. That's what happens when you live in a meritocracy system. When you try to earn your way, you end up killing God, pushing God out of your life. What saves us is that we don't have to earn our way. It's a gift from God. Jesus' death on the cross is God saying, I love you the way you are. And there's nothing you can do or not do that's going to change that. Nothing. And your worth comes from the fact that I am present in you. That's what the gift of the Holy Spirit is about. It is a part of us. And I like to think of it as not necessarily something that some people get and others don't. It's what we all have. We just recognize it at baptism. We begin to expose it. Let it grow in us. That our worth comes from the fact that we are connected to God and each other and everything. Because we have God in us and we are in God. So prayer becomes getting out of that meritocracy system and beginning to see how God is in us and we are in God together. It's a level playing field, brothers and sisters. Some of us aren't better than others. In God's sight, we're all the same. We're all children of God, every last one of us. And once you get into that feel of that connection, what happens is you begin to realize or understand when people are not in that system, when that people are out of whack, where injustice reigns, where people are seeing others as not as good as others and so forth. And what happens is compassion happens. You begin to see it, feel it, and act upon it. And then